Okay, so this is very entertaining, right? What are the 3 things that we know about affirmative action? It is absolutely 100% necessary. But however, it cannot explain the success of any one individual.
Right.
Nor does it have any victims at all. And if you're an admissions officer at a private university or an administrator, you have unlimited power to do what you want, and you can justify any of it under any of these rules or systems. There was statistical information. And of course, the big statistical kicker to the whole thing is that at top institutions, it's common for different ethnic groups to have different cutoffs for SAT that are as wide as 400 points. Right. So different groups. So specifically Asians need to perform at 400 SAT points higher than other ethnicities in order to actually get admitted into these. I mean, it's not even about, white people are a part of this, but like Asians are like a very big part of this. And actually the Harvard case was actually brought by an activist on behalf of actually the Asian students who were being turned away. And it's basically, it's the cliche now in the Valley and in the medical community, which is like, if you want a super genius, you hire an Asian from Harvard because they are guaranteed to be freaking Einstein. Because if they weren't, they were never getting admitted, right? Almost all the qualified Asians get turned away. So they've been running this. It's a very, very explicit, very, very clear program. This, of course, has been a third rail of things that people are not supposed to discuss under any circumstances. The thing that has really changed the tenor on this is, I think, 2 things. Number one, those Supreme Court cases. The Supreme Court ruled that they can no longer do that. I will tell you, I don't believe there's a single education institution in America that is conforming with the Supreme Court ruling. I think they are all flagrantly ignoring it. And we could talk about that.
Mostly because of momentum, probably, or what?
They are trying to make the world a better place. They are trying to solve all these social problems. They are trying to have diverse student populations. They are trying to live up to the expectations of their donors. They are trying to make their faculty happy. They are trying to have their friends and family think that they're good people.
Right.
They're trying to have the press write nice things about them. It's nearly impossible for them. And to be clear, like, nobody has been fired from an admissions office for, 25 years or prior, the Supreme Court now has ruled to be illegality. And so they're all the same people under the exact same pressures. The numbers are moving a little bit, but I don't know anybody in the system who thinks that they're complying with the Supreme Court. Like, who's in charge in the rank ordering of who rules who? The universities rule the Supreme Court way more than the Supreme Court rules the universities. Right. Well, another example of that is, I think is that every sitting member of the Supreme Court right now went to either Harvard or Yale. Right. Like the level of incestuousness here is anyway. So there's that. And so this has been running for a very long time. So one is the Harvard and UNC cases kind of gave up the game, number one, or at least showed what the mechanism was. Right. And then, of course, there's the thing that you basically can't talk about, which is all the white people are being excluded. And then it turns out it's also happening to Black people. And this is the thing that blew my freaking mind when I found out about it. So then I discovered this New York Times article from 2004 called Blacks Are Being Admitted into Top Schools at Greater Numbers, But Which Ones?
Uh-oh.
And again, and by the way, this is in the New York Times. This is not in whatever, National Review. This is New York Times. By the way, it's happening today in education institutions, and it's happening in companies, and you can see it all over the place, and the government. Which is, at least at that time, the number was half of the Black admits into a place like Harvard were not American-born Blacks. They were foreign-born Blacks. Specifically, Northern African, generally Nigerian, or West Indian. Right. And by the way, many Nigerians and Northern Africans have come to the U.S. and have been very successful. Nigerian Americans as a group, way outperform. They're, this is a super smart cohort of people. And then West Indian Blacks in the U.S. are incredibly successful. Most recently, by the way, Kamala Harris, as well as Colin Powell, just 2 sort of examples of that. And so basically what Henry Louis Gates and Lonnie Grenier said in the story is Harvard is basically struggling to either, whatever it was, identify, recruit, make successful, whatever it was, American-born native Blacks. And so therefore they were using high skill immigration as an escape hatch to go get Blacks from other countries. And then this was 2004. When you could discuss such things. Obviously, that is a topic that nobody has discussed since. It has sailed on. All of the DEI programs of the last 20 years have had this exact characteristic. There's large numbers of Black people in America who are fully aware of this and are like, it's obviously not us that are getting these slots. We're literally competing with people who are being imported. And if you believe in the basis of affirmative action, you are trying to make up for historical injustice of American Black slavery. And so the idea that you import somebody from, Nigeria that never experienced that, is tremendously insulting to Black Americans. Anyway, so you can see where I'm heading with this. We have been in a 60-year social engineering experiment to exclude native-born people from the educational slots and jobs that high-skilled immigration has been funneling foreigners into. Right. And so it turns out it's not a victim-free thing. There's like 100% there's victims, because why? There's only so many. For sure, there's only so many education slots, and then for sure, there's only so many of these jobs. Right. Google only hires so many, whatever level 7 engineers. Right. And so that's the other side of it. Right. And so you're a farm boy in Wisconsin, right? Or a, Black American whose ancestors arrived here, on a slave ship 300 years ago in Louisiana, or a, Cambodian immigrant in, the Bronx. And you're a kid or a Jewish immigrant, or from a very successful Jewish family. And, your entire, for 3 generations, you and your parents and grandparents went to Harvard. And what all of those groups know is the system that has been created is not for them. Right. It's designed specifically to exclude them. And then what happens is all of these tech people show up in public and say, yeah, let's bring in more foreigners. Right. And so anyway, so the short version of it is you can't anymore, I don't think, just have the quote high skilled immigration conversation for either education or for employment without also having the DEI conversation. And then underneath, and then DEI is just another word for affirmative action. So it's the affirmative action conversation. And you need to actually deal with this at substance and to see what's actually happening to people you need to join these topics. And I think it is much harder to make the moral claim for high skilled immigration given the extent to which DEI took over both the education process and the hiring process. So here's a question for your friend who has tenure at one of these places, which is who runs his university?
I think, you know who I think runs it?
Yeah.
Whoever the fuck says they run it. That's what great leadership is. Like a president has that power.
But
the president of a university has the leverage because they can mouth off like Elon can.
Can they fire the professors?
They can fire them through being vocal publicly, yes.
Can they fire the professors?
What are you talking about, legally?
Can they fire,
no, they cannot fire the professors.
Then we know who runs the university.
The professors?
Yeah, professors. The professors and the students. The professors and the feral students. And they're, of course, in a radicalization feedback cycle driving each other crazy.
Feral students.
The feral students. Yeah, the feral students. Yeah, the feral students. What happens when you're put in charge of your bureaucracy where the thing that the bureaucracy knows is that they can outlast you? The thing that the tenured professors at all these places know is it doesn't matter who the president is because they can outlast them, because they cannot get fired. And by the way, it's the same thing that bureaucrats in the government know. It's the same thing that the bureaucrats in the Department of Education know. They know the exact same thing. They can outlast you. It's the whole thing that it's the resistance. Like they can be the resistance. They can just sit there and resist, which is what they do. They're not fireable.
That's definitely a crisis that needs to be solved. That's a huge problem. If we can just linger on the Machiavellians, it's a study of power and power dynamics. Like you mentioned, looking at the actual reality of the machinery of power. From everything you've seen now in government, but also in companies, what are some interesting things you can sort of continue to say about the dynamics of power, the jostling for power that happens inside these institutions?
Yeah, so a lot of it, we already talked about this a bit with the universities, which is you can apply a Machiavellian style lens to it's why I posed the question to you that I did, which is, okay, who runs the university? The trustees, the administration, the students, or the faculty? And the true answer is some combination of the three, or of the four, plus the donors. By the way, plus the government, plus the press, et cetera, right? And so there's a mechanical interpretation of that. I mean, companies operate under the exact same, set of questions. Who runs a company? The CEO, but like the CEO runs the company basically up to the day that either the shareholders or the management team revolt. If the shareholders revolt, it's very hard for the CEO to stay in the seat. If the management team revolts, it's very hard for the CEO to stay in the seat. By the way, if the employees revolt, it's also hard to stay in the seat. By the way, if the New York Times comes at you, it's also very hard to stay in the seat. If the Senate comes at you, it's very hard to stay in the seat. So, like a reductionist version of this that is a good shorthand is who can get who fired. So who has more power? The newspaper columnist who makes $200,000 a year, or the CEO who makes $200 million a year. And it's like, well, I know for sure that the columnist can get the CEO fired. I've seen that happen before. I have yet to see a CEO get a columnist fired. Not to dwell on these fires, but it's a case. You see, the pressure reveals things, right? And so if you've been watching what's happening with the LA Times recently, so this guy, biotech entrepreneur, buys the LA Times like 8 years ago. It is just like the most radical social revolutionary thing you can possibly imagine. It endorses every crazy left-wing radical you can imagine. It endorses Karen Bass. It endorses Gavin Newsom. It's just like a litany of all the people who are currently burning the city to the ground. It's just like endorsed every single bad person every step of the way. He's owned it the entire time. He put his foot down right before, for the first time, I think, put his foot down right before the November election and said, we're not getting, he said, we're going to get out of this thing where we just always endorse a Democrat. And we said, we're not endorsing, I think he said, we're not endorsing for the presidency. And like the paper flipped out, right? It's like our billionaire backer who's, I don't know what he spends, but like he must be burning $50 or $100 million a year out of his pocket to keep this thing running. He paid $500 million for it, which is amazing. Back when people still thought these things were businesses. And then he's probably burned another 500 million over the last decade, keeping it running. And he burns probably another 50 or 100 million a year to do this. And the journalists at the LA Times hate him with the fury of 1,000 suns. Like they just like absolutely freaking despise him. And they have been like attacking him. And, the ones that can get jobs elsewhere quit and do it. And the rest just stay and say the worst, most horrible things about him. And they want to constantly run these stories attacking him. And so he has had this reaction that a lot of people in LA are having right now to this fire and to this just like incredibly vivid collapse of leadership. And all these people that his paper had endorsed are just disasters. And he's on this tour. He's basically he's decided to be the boy who says the emperor has no clothes, but he's doing it to his own newspaper. Very smart guy. He's on a press tour and he's basically saying, yeah, we did all that and we endorsed all these people and it was a huge mistake and we're going to completely change. And his paper is, in a complete internal revolt. But I go through it, which is, okay, now we have a very interesting question, which is who runs the LA Times? Because for the last 8 years, it hasn't been him. It's been the reporters. Now, for the first time, the owner is showing up saying, oh, no, I'm actually in charge. And the reporters are saying, no, you're not. And like it is freaking on. And so again, if the Machiavellian's mindset on this is like, okay, how is power actually exercised here? Can a guy who's like even super rich and super powerful, who even owns his own newspaper, can he stand up to a full-scale assault, not only by his own reporters, but by every other journalism outlet who also now thinks he's the Antichrist?